Jana Vallabha Giridhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari. Bring it down. Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be here, and really grateful to be in New Govardhana, really grateful to be in this country and the devotees in this communities association, and I really thank them and Krishna. So the verse for today is chapter 12, verse number 26 from Canto 3. Ridikamo bruva krodho lobas chadhara dachadat asyad vak sindavo medran niriti payor nirtik payor agashrayaha. Ridikamo bruva krodho lobas chadara dachadat asyad vak sindavo medran nirtik payor agashrayaha. Ridikamo bruva krodho Lobaschadaradachadat Asyad vak sindavo medran Nirtik payor Nirtik payor agashrayaha. Your turn. Asyad vak sindavo medran Nirtik payor agashrayaha. And the other devotees? At least one more. Maybe from the Vaishnavi side. Anyone else? Okay, word for word. Ridhi, from the heart. Kamo, lust. Bruvaha, from the eyebrows. Krodaha, anger. Lobaha, greed. Cha, also. Adharadatchadat, from between the lips. Asyat, from the mouth. Vak, speaking. Sindavaha, the seas. Medrat, from the penis. Niritihi, low activities. Payoho, from the anus. Aga ashrayaha, reservoir of all vices. Translation and purport for this verse by Srila Prabhupada. Lust and desire became manifested from the heart of Brahma, anger from between his eyebrows, greed from between his lips, the power of speaking from his mouth, the ocean from his penis. So next time you go to the beach, you can meditate on Lord Brahma. The power of speaking from his mouth, the ocean from his penis, and low and abominable activities from his anus, the source of all sins. Please repeat it. Lust and desire became manifested from the heart of Brahma. Anger from between his eyebrows, greed from between his lips, the power of speaking from his mouth, the ocean from his penis, and low and abominable activities from his anus, the source of all sins. Srila Prabhupada's purport. A conditioned soul is under the influence of mental speculation. However great one may be in the estimation of mundane education and learning, he cannot be free from the influence of psychic activities. Therefore, it is very difficult to give up lust and the desires for low activities until one is in the line of devotional service to the Lord. When one is frustrated in lust and low desires, anger is generated from the mind and expressed from between the eyebrows. Ordinary men are therefore advised to concentrate the mind by focusing on the place between the eyebrows, whereas the devotees of the Lord are already practiced to place the Supreme Personality of Godhead on the seat of their minds. The theory of becoming desireless is untenable because the mind cannot be made desireless. When it is recommended that one be desireless, it is understood that one should not desire things which are destructive to spiritual values. A devotee of the Lord always has the Lord in his mind, and thus he does not need to be desireless, because all his desires are in relationship with the service of the Lord. The power of speaking is called Sarasvati, or the goddess of learning, and the birthplace of the goddess of learning is the mouth of Brahma. Even if a man is endowed with the favor of the goddess of learning, it is quite possible for his heart to be full of lust and material desires, and his eyebrows to display symptoms of anger. And we'll see with the example of the Digvijay and his argument with Lord Chaitanya. One may be very learned in the mundane estimation, but that does not mean that he is free from all low activities of lust and anger. Good qualifications can be expected only from a pure devotee who is always engaged in the thought of the Lord, or in samadhi, with faith. Here's the translation again. Lust and desire became manifested from the heart of Brahma, anger from between his eyebrows, greed from between his lips, the power of speaking from his mouth, the ocean from his penis, and low and abominable activities from his anus, the source of all sins. Ki Jai. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So the title of this little class is called We Can't Fake Bhakti. We can't fake bhakti, however good or attractive it may appear, whether physically or intellectually. You know how we all want to be different from others, and we try with whatever assets we may have to, distinguish ourselves from others. When I was in high school, I went to high school in Los Angeles, and I grew up in France, and so even though I was born in the States, I wanted, I thought, okay, if I play the French card, I'll be unique among my peers. And because I'm a little bit, a mini intellectual, I was into Jean-Paul Sartre and the existentialist, philosophy before I became a devotee. And I remember I would always flaunt I'm an existentialist. I read Jean-Paul Sartre, even though I practically didn't read any of his atheist, horrible philosophy, atheistic to the bone. His wife, Simone de Beauvoir, was responsible for basically bringing in abortion all over the planet, So I remember we went to, for the first meeting I ever went to see His Holiness Hridaya Nanamarj. Some of you are disciples of his. He's one of my mentors. In Los Angeles, we went to a sort of an informal talk he was having, and I remember I arrived a little late where he was talking in his home. And when we sat down, I always remember he was speaking about Jean-Paul Sartre. And just as I sat down, he was I remember those words. He said, "You call an old man in dirty clothes, sitting in some wooden chair in some dirty cafe in the streets, on the streets of Paris, sipping some coffee with a cigarette dangling from his lip, looking at girls in the street. You call that a philosopher?" And I remember I was like, wow. And really for the first time, it dawned on me that the behavior, the character of someone is actually what makes him or her valuable or noble, etc. Right? I mean, maybe most of you realized that long ago, but I'm a little slow. So it took me 20 years to come to that realization with the help of of Hridayana March. So we all, those of us who are either born in the Hare Krishna movement or who have or who are, taking interest or who have already, bitten the bullet to practice Krishna consciousness, we all have had these sort of coming to realizations that, oh, yeah, what, the talk may be very attractive, but if there's no bhakti, and specifically if there's no behavior in, like walking one's talk, then, all that glitters is not gold. And the person's, again, character is really what counts, right? You can't fake bhakti. Here in this purport, Prabhupada is specifically kind of referring to what Krishna calls in the Gita the Mayaya Parityagana, right? In the 7th chapter of the Gita, Krishna talks about the 4 people who come to Krishna, to come to him, and one of them is the Mayaya Parityagana, the person whose knowledge, jnana, has been stolen by illusion. Right? Prabhupada defines the term Maya Parityagana. I mean, in his translation, here's the translation for our purification. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, lowest among mankind. Oh, sorry, he's talking about those who don't come to him, because there's also 4 who do come. The miscreants who are grossly foolish, lowest among mankind, whose knowledge has been stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. In 2 other places, Prabhupada defines the term. He says, Mayaya Parityagana means he might be highly educated academically, but Maya has taken away his knowledge. In another place, in Prabhupadesque fashion, typical, he says, means he's rascal number 1, but he's thinking that he's vastly learned. I remember when I went to University of California in Santa Barbara, I took a graduate seminar on Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami was one of the greatest theologians in the Bhakti tradition. So at the University of California, there was this professor. I'll mention her name because the chances of her getting to know that I sort of criticized her are 1 in a million. So Barbara Holdridge, so she's this, she has a PhD in like Vaishnava philosophy from Harvard. And she's friends with Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Krishna Kshetra Swami and so on. And so she gave a talk on some specific passage from some obscure book by Jiva Goswami that 99% of ISKCON devotees have no idea the book even exists. And I was like, oh my God. I literally had tears in one eye. I was like, wow, this is so profound. And I remember during the break, we went outside, and then she went out with us, and she pulled out her cigarette box, took out a cigarette and started smoking, the analogy of like licking the bottle of honey, but not actually, tasting it. In the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam, in the symptoms of Kali Yuga, what this verse talks about, and specifically what Prabhupada talks about in this verse, namely, again, like you can't fake bhakti, it's not about, externals or fancy language, is we're warned about this in the 12th canto. There's this verse that goes like this: Lingam ivashtama kyatav anunyapati karanam avritya nyaya dorbalyam panditye chapalam vacha. So in Kali Yuga, which we're victims of, all of us, I mean maybe for a few exceptions, but we're all in the same boat of Kali Yuga, a person's spiritual position will be ascertained merely according to external symbols. And on that same basis, people will change from one spiritual order to the next. A person's propriety will be seriously questioned if he does not earn a good living. And the relevant point here, and one who is very clever at juggling words will be considered a learned scholar. Modern philosophers, like there's this one guy called Wittgenstein. I read maybe one paragraph. Like word jugglery on steroids, right? But, among so-called learned scholars, oh, yes, it's very, it's a wonderful philosopher. What does he mean? Oh, I don't know. I mean, we don't know, but it's, it's brilliant. It's brilliant, So again, it may look good, but if the person speaking doesn't have bhakti, doesn't have devotion, doesn't have good character, falls prey to anger, falls prey to lust, then where is his education? Where is his real worth, you know? Where is his real worth? I remember there was a documentary about 2 years ago about Radhadesh, our ISKCON center community in Belgium. And it went on national Belgium television, prime time. It was like a 1 or 2 hour special on the ISKCON project in Radhadesh. And they interviewed everyone, you know, the pujaris, the people taking care of the cows, the cooks, the restaurant, everything, you know. And afterwards on social media, the recurring theme of, you know, what was answering the question, what was your favorite part of that documentary, was the part that came again and again. People preferred this one part where there's this old brahmachari who's from France and he lives there, and he was asked, so what does it mean to be a monk? What does it mean to be a monk, a brahmachari, you know, wearing saffron, not a householder? What does it mean to be a monk? And he said, well, it means that when I see a beautiful woman, I look at her only once. And then he added, and sometimes I look twice. And when he said that, when he, you know, kind of revealed where he was at, he wasn't putting on a show, he wasn't putting on a facade, he was like straight about where he is, that endeared him and the entire Hare Krishna movement, you know, to the entire population of Belgium. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but, you know, that was the most endearing part, right? Because he wasn't, you know, putting on a facade. So coming back to this thing about all that glitters is not gold, and specifically in the context of knowledge and, you know, fancy words and word jugglery, as Prabhupada is talking to us here in the purport, I thought of referring to Bhaktivinoda Thakur in one of his famous statements, you know, where most of you know this statement, where he says that material education means making everyone more and more of an ass. Like, you go to, you know, mundane, or let's say non-religious education, and you end up, according to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who we see in the picture right here, as an ass, right, as a fool. By the same token, and this is a little parenthesis, but by the same token, that does not mean that, you know, devotees of Krishna or theists in general, you know, insist that nobody should be educated, everyone should be foolish, you know, on the plea that, oh, if we go to some university or get some knowledge that we can precisely engage in Krishna service, and that's the point, then somehow that's, you know, a no-no. As a matter of fact, there's a whole list of quotes from Prabhupada where, in the context of education, he's encouraging his followers to get higher degrees for the sake of Krishna. For example, in 1968, he tells one devotee in a letter, he says, I am so glad to learn that your examination in MA is successful, like masters, and I hope very soon you will have your PhD degrees, both titles engaged in the service of the Lord. And that's the important point. Engaging material things in God's service makes them spiritual. That's our whole notion of yukta vairagya, right? So he continues, there are 4 things desirable in this material world: good parentage, sumptuous wealth, sufficient education, and good beauty. These things are sometimes impediments in the service of the Lord, because such persons with great parentage, wealth, etc., becomes materially puffed up and thus deviates from Krishna consciousness. But, and here's the but when they are employed in the service of the Lord, their value becomes many more times greater. And then he uses the analogy of the 1 and the zeros. Just like 0 has no value, but when 0 is placed on the right side of 1, the value of 0 enhances to 10 times. Similarly, our life, wealth, intelligence, and words become 100 times, 100 greater and greater if they are employed in the service of the Lord. So, right, 0 is 0, but you put a 1 before the 0, it becomes 10. You put 3 zeros before the 1, it becomes 1,000, etc., etc. So, this is an important point that distinguishes the Vaishnavas, or the devotees of Krishna, from what we, the Vaishnavas, call the Mayavadis, or the impersonalists, sort of the theological bad guys, or those we disagree with and have disagreed for centuries and centuries, right? The non-dualists who have quite a big monopoly in the world of, especially in the yoga niche and the New Age niche, if it exists. It's a popular notion that we are ultimately one, and there's no distinction between soul and God, and when you meditate long enough, soul and God actually become one, and you realize that you are God, and so on, right? So in that context, it's like there's no question of yukta vairagya, because everything in the material world is illusion. Everything in the material world is illusion, right? Jagat mitya, right? Brahma satyam, jagat mitya. It's one of their famous slogans. Brahma satyam, like Brahman, right? Spirit is satya, is truth, is reality. But Jagat Mitya, this material world, and everything including in it, from a PhD degree to, a professional kitchen on wheels, to, computer technology, to a guitar, is all illusion. And therefore, it has to be rejected. We reject it, right? And that's why it's not an accident that in the strict non-dual school, only when you have taken sannyas can you start speaking on philosophy, right? There's a saying, first take sannyas, then speak on Vedanta Sutra. Because if you're still so-called, involved in the world of Maya, you can't speak on God, right? But the Vaishnavas have a different slant. The Vaishnavas, on the basis of, scriptures like the Gita and the Bhagavatam, accept that this world, yes, is temporary, but it's not illusory because it's an emanation. It comes from a real God. It comes from the Supreme Person who's not an illusion, who's real. And therefore, the mistake is engaging that matter for one's own selfish pleasures. But the solution is not to reject those things. The solution is to engage those very things in the service of their proprietor, God, Krishna, right? So, yeah. So again, coming back to, you can't fake bhakti. If it sounds good, if it looks good, and the words are very attractive, who is actually a scholar? Chanakya Pandit tells us, that someone who this is more like for men, a definition of who is a scholar for men, because he talks about seeing mothers. So I don't know. Gender issues. But here's a famous statement by Chanakya Pandit, and Vaishnavis can apply it also, of course, in their own context. One who considers another's wife as his mother, another's possessions as a lump of dirt, and treats all other living beings as he would himself, is considered to be learned. So, as apprentices, like, with all due respect to our brother Christians, for example, but, Prabhupada's main critique, for example, of the Christians was not their theology so much, but, why are you eating meat? Why are you killing animals? And that can be, you wouldn't want to be killed, so if you're really learned, then, you would treat others like you would treat yourself, and therefore you would have a plant-based diet. So that's the real scholar. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the real scholar, the person who's actually educated, who actually has knowledge, is someone who is devoted to God. That famous verse, everyone knows it, Bahunam Janmanam Ante Gyanavam Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Sudurlabhaha. Krishna says, after many births and deaths, one who is actually in knowledge surrenders to me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Right? So one who is jnana, bahunam janmanam. Janma means birth, bahu means many. So bahunam janmanam ante, at the end of many births. Jnanavan, someone who is endowed with jnana, right? Mam prapadyate, he surrenders unto me. That's the definition of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita of who is actually a learned scholar. Right? So that's what counts, Everything else relatively is not important. And therefore you have these stories like, for example, the analogy of the boatman, Prabhupada told that story a lot, right? There's, in Bangladesh, like public transportation takes place on boats a lot, right? In these little tributaries. So there's, this story, right? The boatman and the scholar. So there's this poor villager boatman, that's his job, he's illiterate, and then some, I don't know, maybe some British colonial guy who has a big education comes, and on the boat he's being, taken to some place, and he asks the simple boatman, "Hey boatman, do you know anything about cultural anthropology?" And the boatman says, "No sir, I don't know." And then the man says, 25% of your life is spoiled, right? And then a little bit later, like, "Well boatman, do you know at least anything about microbiology?" He said, "No sir, I don't know what that is." 50% of your life is spoiled. You know that story, right? Then it starts raining, the boat starts, sinking, there's a storm, and the boatman asks the man, like, Sir, do you know how to swim?" And the man says, "No, I don't know how to swim." And then he says, "Sir, 100% of your life is spoiled," right? So if you have devotion to God, you're good to go. And if you don't have devotion to God, you may, be a scholar of Wittgenstein and Jean-Paul Sartre. Sorry, take birth again. The story of the illiterate Brahmin in South India that Lord Chaitanya visited is another good one to quote. For those who don't know that story, when Lord Chaitanya, who we believe is Krishna, who came 500 years ago, you see his picture over there, when he was traveling through South India, he went to a very famous temple, I think it was Sri Rangam, where there's a large community of Brahmins, right? And one of them had the Bhagavad Gita in his hand upside down, and he was crying and pretending to read, and Brahmins around him, from the priestly community, were making fun of him. And according to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya asks the Brahmin, "Hey Brahmin, what are you doing and why are you crying?" And according to the story, the Brahmin said, "Well, my guru gave me an instruction to read the Bhagavad Gita every day, but I don't know how to read, but I'm trying to fulfill his instructions. So, I'm trying, to read it." And then Lord Chaitanya said, "But then why are you crying?" So I'm crying because every time I see, the cover, and I see how God, Almighty God, has taken the humble position of becoming the chariot driver of his own devotee, I become moved. And what did Lord Chaitanya do? The text tells us, right? He embraced that Brahmin and says, "You have understood Bhagavad Gita." And the guy was illiterate, The teacher of, the guru of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who himself Prabhupada called a walking encyclopedia. The guy probably had an IQ of through the roof. He was like an astronomer, a mathematician, you name it, right? And his guru couldn't sign his name, was illiterate. So in the realm of things that matter, devotion to God and proper behavior is ultimately what counts, is ultimately what counts. There's this amazing verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, this one sentence. It goes like this: Dharma stapana hetu sadhura vyavahar, which is translated as, a devotee's behavior establishes the true purpose of religious principles. A devotee's behavior establishes the true purpose of religious principles. Far out, huh? So, yeah, behavior is what counts. And we have to be, on guard to not be fooled by things that are not important, externals, whether spoken or whether looks. One of my favorite stories is the story of Pundarik Vidyanidhi in Chaitanya Bhagavat. If I may, Pundarik Vidyanidhi is described in Chaitanya Bhagavat as, he's like esoterically, ontologically, he's the daughter of King Vrishabhanu, right? If I'm not mistaken. He's like no, wait a second. No, he's the father of Radharani. He's the father of Radha. So Radharani, Radha Krishna. So in the spiritual world, her quote-unquote father, the soul who eternally acts as Radharani's father, is called Vrishabhanu, right? If I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I'm right. At any rate, when that associate comes in Lord Chaitanya's earthly pastimes, he takes on the male body of a rich, well-to-do, upper-class man called Pundarik Vidyanidhi, who was a great devotee. Gadadhar Pandit, we sing his mantra every day, Shri Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar, another inconceivably intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya, who almost has his own, tattva, who some say is Radharani herself, or the shadow of Radharani, like some, something really special. So the story goes that Gadadhar Pandit was asked by Mukunda. Mukunda was another associate of Lord Chaitanya who was known to sing beautifully and read the Bhagavatam very beautifully. So Mukunda told Gadadhar, hey, I want you to meet this great devotee. His name is Pundarik Vidyanidhi. Come with me. And so reluctantly, kind of like reluctantly how Prabhupada agreed to go visit Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Okay, I'll go. And then he met Bhaktisiddhanta and was like, wow. So in a similar way, reluctantly, the text tells us he goes to see Pundarik Vidyanidhi. And when they enter into Pundarik Vidyanidhi's house, Pundarik Vidyanidhi is not your typical devotee. Why? He has a lot of beautiful furniture. He's sitting on this sofa. He's got fancy clothes. He's got oil in his long hair. And he's got a mirror near him, to look at himself. And people are servants are fanning him. And Gadadhar Pandit, like this most exalted soul, the text tells us, was judged him externally. Like, who is this guy? He? A devotee? What to speak of an exalted devotee? And reading his mind, Mukunda, the text tells us, was like, you doubt him? Let me show you. And then he started reciting one verse from the Bhagavatam, the famous verse where Shukadev Goswami glorifies how Krishna is merciful, because even though Putana tried to kill him by giving her poisonous, nipple to him to kill him, he was so kind that he gave her liberation in spite of her wanting to kill him. So he's reading this verse out loud, the Bhagavatam says, and just by hearing this verse, Pundarik Vidyanidhi just goes into rapture. He just goes crazy in ecstatic love of Krishna. Starts ripping his clothes, ripping his hair out, like convulsing on the ground. His servants are holding him down and stuff, exhibiting, what he's really made of, so to speak, spiritually, And at that point, Pundarik Vidyanidhi, Gadadhar Pandit was like, oh my God. And as a matter of fact, because of that, or that was definitely a factor, he took initiation from Pundarik Vidyanidhi. And behind the curtains, it's Radharani, joining her father. That's kind of the cute thing behind it. So, Prabhus, your behavior is what counts. Your behavior is what counts. And your behavior comes from, trying your best to follow those 4 regulative principles and chanting those rounds and, trying not to offend devotees and trying to serve the mission somehow or other. When you do that, when you try your best to do that, that's when you are really educated. That's when you really have that worth, Because bhakti is all you have. You're going to die. Everything you have, your body's going to die, and everything you have is going to go, and you can't hold anything in this world. And, the only thing you can hold, which we believe is truth, is your devotion to Krishna, your devotion to God, and your spiritual practice, and your service to Krishna, your service to the Vaishnavas. Right? So before concluding, any corrections or comments or questions from the August Assembly, Anton Prabhu? I think the same principle applies to differentiating what's non-devotional stuff, and even within the bhakti world. And like Krishna himself says in the Gita that Scripture is your ultimate authority. Scripture is your ultimate authority. So we try to live our lives and ascertain what is favorable for our devotional service or unfavorable for our devotional service, or according to, ultimately, to the words of the Bhagavatam, to the words of the Caitanya Caritamrita. And in the case of ISKCON, the words of our founder, Acharya Prabhupada, have a lot of weight also, right? So it takes familiarity with the scriptures to be able to, to ascertain, okay, this is like bogus. But sometimes it's really obvious. Like my father was always a non-devotee. He was favorable now, but he was just like, nah. And I remember when I was first starting to come to Krishna consciousness, I was introduced by a friend of mine who was like a Mayavadi. And so she told me, you should read Paramahamsa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. You should read Sai Baba's book. So I remember I got this book from Sai Baba. And my dad looked at it and he's like, he's God? He's so ugly. Are you kidding? He didn't know anything about Bhagavad Gita, but he still was able to ascertain. And so I think the same principle applies, like when you're hearing. I mean, we should be generous and give the benefit of the doubt. But Prabhupada did want us to be independently thoughtful, and we've seen in the history of ISKCON sort of a little bit sometimes kind of blind following, where the last rational decision you make in life is to become a devotee, and after that you just like, that sounds weird, but my temple president said it, so I'll follow, So no, we're supposed to, there's, I think, that healthy balance between understanding what is scripture, what does our founder say if we're, members of ISKCON, and like, praying to Krishna that we can use our buddhi. The word buddhi shows up so many times in the Gita to, ascertain what is correct and what is not correct, Oh, buddhi means intelligence. So Buddha, if I'm not mistaken, is someone who has intelligence. Anything else, Prabhus? Anton Prabhu?
You mentioned a few times that you cannot fake bhakti. My question in relation to bhakti, well, it's very hard to evaluate your own progress, your own bhakti, because you're very subjective to yourself. So on a good day, you think I'm full of bhakti. On a bad day, you think I'm the lowest of the low. So very hard to objectively evaluate your own subjective feelings. And also because bhakti can be fake, or like, it's very hard for someone else to say, oh, you're there or you are here, because it's very hard to know where they are inside. So what's a good method to evaluate someone's progress in bhakti or your own?
Well, as far as our own, I think it's healthy for us to have a humble view. You look at the statements of Kaviraj Goswami, who, the author of Caitanya Charitamrita, who says, I'm lower than a worm in stool. That's pretty humble, right? I think there's an anecdote where, for example, one devotee told Bhaktisiddhanta, Prabhupada's guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, Guru Maharaj or Gurudev, I feel like I'm not making any advancement. And then he said, that's a sign that you are making advancement, right? And in terms of, judging others, well, Prabhupada has this famous statement in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that a fool is undiscovered as long as he does not speak. And certainly a well-dressed fool cannot be identified unless he speaks. So you gotta hear. Okay, what's... And the behavior also, as we've seen, and we don't want to delve on this, but we've seen, very good lessons in our 50 years of ISKCON. It looks good, it glitters, but behind the scenes, the person may be, doing all sorts of abominable activities, right? Abusing children for decades, for example. But externally, like, it's all about, wearing, I'm using the dress code thing, but it, applies to all, it's all about wearing non-stitched cloth as often as you can all day long, and meanwhile, behind this, behind closed doors, all sorts of horrible things are going on, right? So, we have to be intelligent, but at the same time, we can't be too, of course, when you see something and, it's clearly adharmic, then there's no sentimental attitude to have, but we can't, we tend to criticize others and fault find so easily, and that comes from our own lust and jealousy of others and so on. So we have to also, be a little generous to others, other devotees. Otherwise we become victims of fault, of unnecessarily fault finding. Is that okay? Anyone else? Okay, well, we'll take one more question from Anton and then we'll finish.
You mentioned a few times that devotees' behavior establishes the purpose of religious principles. In my observation of devotees, I noticed that devotees come from different walks of life. They have very different personalities, and while we promote relationship between devotees, sometimes relationship between devotees is not really as good as we would want them to be. Some personalities just haven't had time to mix. But I noticed that also all sort of personalities can be unified in service to Krishna. So you put them to serve to Krishna together, they're like, okay, we all serving Krishna, that's fine. But you take that away and you go, okay, well, go to take rest or something, and then you can see their behavior become very
Appealing.
for example.
Yeah.
So two questions over here. What is the best way, in your opinion, to develop and promote better relationship among devotees? That's number one. And number two, can you really judge devotees' behavior outside of service of Krishna? Or you know what I'm saying?
The second question, not really. Can you judge devotees outside of their...
Okay, so let me phrase it in a clear way. Everyone has ups and downs in their behavior. Which do you choose to evaluate someone's behavior?
Oh. Well, if we're generous Vaishnavas, which we pray we are, we'll look at the positive, right? Glass half full instead of glass half empty, and we hear testimonies from Prabhupada disciples who had one-on-one interactions with him, and you hear this theme again and again, how he always sparked any little bhakti that was there, any like good thing, he would like, oh wow, what a great service, really encouraging. And as far as the first question, how do we improve devotee relationships? I notice in my own life when I'm, doing a good job at, being a good devotee, and for me that means, the core, the principle, the regulative principles, the chanting of rounds, the trying to be, up at a certain early time so we can, absorb ourselves in Brahma Muhurta. When I'm kind of following the program, so to speak, the sadhana, decently, surprise, surprise, my relationship with other devotees becomes a lot more smooth and friendly. And conversely, if I have an accidental fall down, which I've certainly have, and I pray I won't have too many more, or maybe none if Krishna's merciful. But the point is, because when we're on that platform of bhakti yoga, we're on that boat. We're not getting that, we're getting wet, but when we break those principles or we stop chanting, then it's like we're in the ocean of the three modes of material nature. And like you yourself said, then some of our guna and karma, like the bad side of it, the really comes out. And, we're in the material world where everyone's like fighting with each other like cats and dogs. So it's normal so the solution is, you got to be Krishna conscious. And in spite of, even then, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, associated with like-minded devotees. So that's also legit, even though devotees are devotees, they have their own, first of all, their own psychophysical natures, which hopefully they can engage in Krishna service. But, maybe you may compare two devotees' charts and you're like, oh my God, these people, there's no way they can get along. And yeah, okay, if they're in a kirtan, they'll tolerate each other and chant or serve together in the kitchen or something. But on a sort of a more material, physical level, they're just not compatible, and that's okay. I mean, we're not, we're not supposed to be friends, best friends with everyone. Hopefully, we don't create enemies and create, commit Vaishnava aparadhs. But ultimately, like Prabhupada gives this wonderful analogy: when you get on a boat to go to like somewhere, you don't really care like who else is sitting with you. It's like, and it's not like it's the goal of getting on that boat is to become best friends with everyone sitting around you. Like, he didn't say that part, but the analogy of sitting on the boat, he says, why do you care? Or like, who cares? And that's his verbatim words. Like, you're on the boat, you're going to the same destination, and yeah, devotees are coming from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of baggage, all sorts of conditioning, all sorts of, there's some super liberal devotees, super conservative devotees, to use American politics, whatever it's worth, some are some are Republicans, some are Democrats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you just kind of, you find your niche and like-minded devotees, and by the strength of your bhakti, where Krishna reciprocates so kindly, then it's just a lot easier to be friendly, ideally, with everyone. And then there's some devotees that Krishna blesses you to be close with, and those are your, more intimate friends in bhakti. Right? So Prabhus, thank you. We're really lucky to be here. We're super fortunate to have this bhakti yoga. We're super fortunate to have this wonderful knowledge. And here, maybe you take it for granted, but boy, when I woke up this morning to get some clothes from the lines and I saw these stars, I'm like, oh my God, how wonderful it is to live here and to be in this very open-minded community where so many people who are not devotees are feeling, hopefully, comfortable, and we see and very grateful to be here. So we're really blessed here. And let's continue. Thank you, Prabhu. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.